Pleasure is often treated as a luxury, something we earn after taking care of everyone and everything else. But what if pleasure isn't the reward? What if it's a part of a foundation for living a more connected and vibrant life? What if it's also possible to reclaim the pleasure after sexual violence? If you've listened to this podcast before, you've probably heard me talk about the 3 pillars of better sex: communication, empowerment, and pleasure skills. Today's conversation touches on empowerment. One of the things that I've noticed people often struggle with is giving themselves permission to have what they want. Reclaiming pleasure often begins with reclaiming your voice and your desires. That's why I'm so excited to talk to my guest today, Annette Benedetti. Together, we are going to explore pleasure and what happens when we reconnect to ourselves, and how to reclaim pleasure can be an important part of healing after sexual and violence. Welcome to the Better Sex Podcast. I am your host, Deborah Catt, certified tantric educator, dominatrix, and relationship guide. This is where we have honest conversations about sex and relationship and explore what actually helps people to create those better sex lives. I truly believe that a sexy world is a happy and a safe world. Before we begin, a quick reminder that we talk openly about sex, intimacy, desire, and some of these episodes, I would say all of these episodes, may not be appropriate for all ages or listening environments. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who you think needs to hear what we are talking about. So, I want to support you in having a better sex life with the person you love. So I invite you to book a sexy reset call using the link below in the show notes. We look at what's happening in your relationship, where you're stuck, and where you want more of. So, enough of that. Let's jump in. Today I am chatting with Annette Benedetti. She is a sex educator, intimacy coach, podcaster who helps women to reclaim their voice, their power, and their pleasure after sexual assault. As a queer woman and a sexual assault survivor, she brings a trauma-informed perspective to conversations about desire, healing, and reclaiming the erotic self. So, that is a lot to say, and I am so curious. How did you welcome, Annette? How did you get here? Like, this is quite a place to be. So, and thank you so much for sharing your story and your truth.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting when I look at the arc of my life that often I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer first and then grew into coaching and being here. But, with every story, there's a story arc. And when I look at the story of my life, how I got here is wild and crazy, but also makes total sense. And I oftentimes think of the inception of how I ended up here as, of course, that moment in my life. And when I was a teenager, when I was sexually assaulted. And I was raped and sexually assaulted. And that was one of the worst moments of my life, but it's also brought me to where I am now, which I think of as one of the best times in my life, because so many women have gone through some sort of sexual assault or trauma that is sexually connected. So that could be giving birth,
Mm,
or repeated sex that's just painful due to either a vaginal condition or a partner that doesn't realize what they're doing is hurting them and they don't know how to voice, what's going on. And all of that's trauma. And so between going through my own trauma and then going through my life, and I first became a writer to regain my voice. I've always been a very sensual, erotic person, and I felt like I couldn't claim that as a survivor because I felt like a survivor's proper place was to act like now they didn't want sex, right? There
mhm.
was something in me that felt like everyone expected someone who was a rape or trauma survivor to shy away from sex when in fact I wanted to have more sex. That is at the core who I am, and at the core who I think a lot of women are. We're just sexually charged creatures, right? But most of us have experienced trauma or shame,
Mm.
societal shame, and we sort of shove it away. So as I regained my voice and started exploring my sexuality, I roundabout found my way here, and that really started with my podcast back. It's been quite some time now, but Trump's first presidency, the whole grab him by the pussy debacle,
Mhm.
something that should have, been a red flag to all of us. And the idea that it was locker room talk and suddenly it was acceptable to talk in this way about women and taking away women's bodily autonomy, really, it set me off. And I thought, well, I talk to my girlfriends about sex all of the time, and we talk in detail, right? About all the things we want and all the crazy kinky things we're trying and doing. But if any of that were to ever get out and hit a hot mic and I were trying to be in any position of power, whether president or CEO, it would be the ruin of my career. And I thought, well,
Mm.
how do we start changing that? We start changing that by taking a leap and talking out loud. So I started my podcast, and back then it was called Locker Room Talk and Shots, and it was women in the quote locker room having drinks and talking about sex.
I
And it was the leap of my lifetime, man, you know?
Mhm, mhm. I love that, and I think that's so there's so many things that I wanna unpack, but I wanna go back to something you said that really caught my attention, which is this idea of, like, what are we the expectation that we're supposed to have if we've, had the experience of being violated. And, I hadn't really thought about that, but there really is this expectation that, it is going to A, be the center of our identity, and B, it's going to become, we're going to shrink or, and not want to be sexual and not want to be pleasureful and all of the expectations that are just inherent in and in fact, taking on the identity of somebody who's been sexually violated and making that the center of the identity. I hadn't really thought that much about that, but that really is a true thing. And so, and then on the other side, the triumph over that experience is, supposed to be there's supposed to be around that as well, and I really appreciate that, you're bringing this conversation up without those 2, polar opposites happening. Um, so and the other piece around the idea of, uh, hopefully all humans are sexual creatures. I mean, I think I can say with certainty that all humans are sexual creatures. We just have different ways of being around it. And, that is just, again, the expectation of what women are supposed to be and how we're supposed to relate to our sexuality. And I'm just curious, like, what are some of the stereotypes that you see around women and sexuality?
Well, so first of all, I want to just say to you, I'm so glad that you grabbed on to that piece that I mentioned about the expectation on survivors of how they should be, which really is kind of, you see it in the movies and all the media, covering up their bodies and shying away from sex. This is the conversation that every sexual podcast needs to be having. This is so important because of the massive number of women who are survivors.
Mhm.
That is not a truth, and that hurts us more than it helps us.
Mm.
And um, and then there's the other side of that is when, which is the since we're talking about stereotypes, with survivors in particular, but this I think can really just bleed into the idea of women and their sexuality. So survivors can kind of go one of two ways, right? It's either
Mhm.
we need to be hiding away and we're scared of sex, or we become the hypersexual. That's the word everybody likes to use. And now she's going out and having all kinds of reckless sex and oversexed because she's damaged.
Mhm.
So there's these two sort of personas built around our sexuality, and you cannot win either way, right? So those are as when it comes to survivors, but it bleeds over into women. It really wraps into sort of the generalizations of and stereotypes of who we are as sexual people. Either we're cold and frigid and we don't want it,
Mhm.
or again, it's the Madonna whore complex, right?
Right.
It and I don't know what there would be Madonna whore, and then there would be the frigid whoever that is, the frigid bitch, right? And
Mhm.
we're put in these categories, and it affects not only our own ability to connect with pleasure and to ask for what we want, but it affects our partner's ability to be in a relationship with us.
Right, right. Well, and as I'm hearing you speak about that, it's like, and then there's this sort of box that we put men in. It's like you're either good men or you're predators, or you're heroes or you're not. And I mean, it's hard not. It's so hard to break out of the boxes. And it's so hard to stop thinking of each other as boxes. Um, and to that point, it does sort of that's part of the way the brain works, where it likes to sort and to
Mm.
figure things out and to figure out, are you foe or are you friend? And so, it makes perfect sense that there is this sorting and this boxing, if you will, of our sexuality. So how do the boxes affect how we think about pleasure?
Well, it depends on which side of the box you're in, right? Though, but it is the idea that a pleasure has a place in our life, especially sexual pleasure. Well,
Mhm,
and this leads into pleasure being siloed as good kinds of pleasure, which is, let's say, getting a back massage or picking a flower and smelling it. That's the kind of pleasure everyone feels comfortable with. But
mhm,
then when sexual pleasure, that's when we start boxing it up as only okay in certain circumstances,
mm, mhm,
right? Only in the bedroom at night with the lights off, only with your husband, only after marriage can you have these kinds of things.
right,
Only through this kind of touch, only through this kind of scene.
mhm,
And for a lot of people, it's well, what scene are you talking about? We're just having sex, right? Of course,
mhm,
you and I know there's a whole world of doors and scenes you can step into. So it creates this idea of pleasure as a good kind of pleasure, bad kind of pleasure, and
mhm,
then where it belongs and when you're allowed to have it. And I guess when you deserve it, right?
mhm,
But the truth is, pleasure just exists. And it's all for us to have. And how we take the activation of pleasure in our body and where we send it, and I'm obviously sending it where I like it, is up to us. You can smell a flower and it stays here in your face and your nose and your heart, and it's just like this great sort of heady feeling. Or you can turn it into a practice where that pleasure then is seeping down through your body and into your genitals or into your sexual core, and you convert it into something more. That's that's pleasure, right?
mhm,
Or we can move it and we can use it how we want to. But we're limiting it. In those boxes, there's no access to that kind of practice with it.
mhm. Well, and it seems like as you're talking, it's like, "Oh, yeah," and, we don't always think of pleasure as a healing modality, right? But it absolutely is, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you use pleasure to heal yourself and, some of the conversations you have with your clients.
Right. So I think something that people have a hard time wrapping their mind around is sexual pleasure. And I'm going to be specific about it because sexual pleasure as a way to heal from sexual trauma,
Mhm.
right? we stay in this place of the idea of healing from sexual trauma is talk therapy, talk therapy. You know, you're somehow going to talk your way out of the trauma that's happened in your body. And I absolutely, therapy is very important. I've been in
Mhm.
therapy a lot in my life. I always turn back to it at times that I need it. So I don't want to be confusing about that at all. But I think what a lot of people find is like, I've been talking for years and years, and still during sex, I can't feel anything, or it hurts, or
Mhm.
I can't orgasm, or I just like go out of my body, or everything. Like it's just, I'm just there. And pleasure is a route to healing that body. And I would say without a pleasure practice, it's going to be hard for you to gain that back because you have to teach your body to trust you again. The body does not know the difference, right, between trauma that's happening in the moment and something that's happened in the past. It doesn't know how to differentiate a safe sexual situation that you're in now with one that hurt you in the past. You
Mhm.
have to teach it to trust that now you're going to keep it safe. You're choosing the sexual situations you're in. It can open up and it can feel again. And I, with my clients, the way that we work through that is
Mhm.
we start by building a pleasure journey experience with ourselves, right? Learning how to experience pleasure, learning to let our bodies trust that pleasure is safe,
Mhm.
and then allowing it to say, okay, now you, all right, I trust you. Now your G spot can feel again. I'm going to let those nerves like feel again because your body does a really great job at protecting you. If it thinks something painful is about to happen and it's basing that on past trauma, it's going to shut right down and protect you from feeling it and from experiencing it. I mean, it's an amazing thing our physical body does for us. The problem is when it starts to think every time you come into a sexual experience, it needs to shut down to keep you safe, right? So we're going to start using pleasure to open those doors again and to teach your body that and your mind and your subconscious that this is possible. And as you start to be able to feel pleasure again in a safe setting, wonderful things happen. I mean, we start at the physical level, but it really goes much deeper than that. You get to reconnect with your sexual self, which I would say is a core part of your true, authentic identity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just kind of want to slow this down for just a moment. So it sounds like, as you were sort of describing the trauma journey, what happens is there's an experience that is um, unwanted in a sexual nature, and your body shuts down or does what it needs to do to protect itself. Sometimes it's just like, let's get this over with and and move on. And so you've had this experience, and your body is continually looking for, like, does this feel like, does this seem like, is this again, sorting into this, like, is this a dangerous thing based on my past experience? And so what you're suggesting is to start, unwinding that reaction or that response by using self-pleasure and to reacquaint the body with the idea that sex is safe. And I'm curious, you use the phrase to trust yourself again. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about particularly, the idea of trust and violation and trust and pleasure.
Right. So I think it's easy for us to think of a sexual assault or a sexual trauma of any kind as something someone else did to us, and that was the betrayal, them betraying us. But what can often I'm gonna say I would even reach to guess at like a 90% of the time lies beneath that, especially in our culture, is this feeling for the women who have been sexually assaulted or raped of self betrayal. Because think about the narrative out in society, which is, why was she wearing that then? Why
Mhm.
did she go home with him? Why was she, hanging out with him? Why was she acting flirty when I saw her hanging? Those things are also spinning in our own minds,
Mhm.
right? There's some part of it that's like, how did I not know?
Right.
How could I have put myself in that situation? Right? And the thing is you can look at that kind of narrative in our mind. If a simpler way, if you've never been assaulted, to think about it is, think about an ex who treated you horribly that you're still getting over, and you're like, how did I not see this
Right.
thing that they did? How did I not know they were this kind of person? And what that really is you struggling with a self-betrayal. How do
Mhm.
I trust myself now?
Mhm.
That is the question. So, how do you start rebuilding trust with yourself? In this case, what I'm suggesting is that starting a self pleasure practice where, for example, this would be a trust exercise I would
Mhm.
take a client through who, let's say, every time they're trying to masturbate or touch themselves, the minute they enter a finger inside of them, they feel nothing or they feel pain. So the exercises we would go through is becoming fully aroused externally,
Mhm.
like where you're like, "Oh, I could have an orgasm soon and I really feel that, like I feel like I want some penetration." And
Mhm.
then you enter yourself, whether with a finger or a toy, and the minute any of those signs pop up, you stop and you honor
Mhm.
the no. You say, "All right." Either you back up and go back outside if you still feel like you want to. If your whole body shuts down, then we just stop and we return to the heady pleasure. We return to whether it's like just, stroking our own arm and like I get very calm with sensual touch. So if I run right now, I don't know, I assume you have listeners too. I love to run light fingertips up and down my arm, and for me, or my chest, just my skin. And for me, that light sensual tickly touch, just it's like I soothe down into my most relaxed self. So then
Mhm.
I would go to something that would feel really safe to me and calming, right? And
Mhm.
myself that I answer to no's, I listen to my body, I honor my body. And that's where we start building trust. Next time we do it again. And each time you do that, your body starts to learn you're going to keep it safe.
Mhm.
And eventually we start to move past that. And then you get to touch your G spot for maybe you get in and you don't numb out, or it doesn't hurt for like 1 minute or 30 seconds, and you get to explore it and rub it and show it safe touch. And then if it starts to shut down, all right, that's enough. That's all for today. Let's go back to external touch or go back to safe touch. Or even if it just means like laying there with some music on and a candle lit and relaxing with no touch, whatever that is. Those are the exercises we do to start to trust ourselves again.
Mhm.
Uh, some people may have partners as well who are invested in their healing process. And as slowly you can work in a partner who learns kind of this approach. And and I've done this just so everybody knows, this is not something that is a heady idea from me. This is something that I've done on myself. Until I was, hmm, I am going to say 50, 49, 50. I didn't have certainly I couldn't find my A spot, which is for some of your listeners. The G spot is located, what we say, mine is like right inside my vaginal opening on the belly wall,
Mhm.
but it can be up to 1 to 2 inches, they say. The A spot is then almost 2 inches deeper than that, same side of the body, uh,
Mhm.
next to or behind the cervix. And it's like when you have orgasms that stem from your A spot or deeper inside you, they are, you know,
Yes, they are.
and
And
I mean, deep and emotional orgasms. That I wasn't able to do that. I've worked my way up to finding these spots by doing this sort of trust building with my body.
And this seems like a great time to point out that there are so many different flavors to orgasm. And I would say in my language, there's a difference between orgasm and climax, right? Climax is that top piece, that top note, that "Ah!" And then, the moving down, and orgasm is all of the waves in between. So for me, and the way I think about it, like, we have this whole, there's all these places where our orgasm can go, and it's sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down, and it, at least in my experience, is rarely a linear line, and I would say that for the male orgasm as well, right? Unfortunately, what we see most, in on TV or in porn is a very lineal, version of orgasm, and, as you were talking about just, checking in with your body, it's like, "How does it feel when I do this? Is it open? Is it numb? Is there feeling?" And then pausing. Oftentimes we think of like, "Oh, well, if we pause, that's the completion." And, what I heard you say was it's like you can pause, you can check in, you can, recalibrate. Do I need more? Do I need less? So, and I love the descriptions of the reminder that there are so many different flavors of orgasm. You can there's the spots that you were talking about up in the cervix and in the front wall of the vagina, and of course there's clitoral, and then there's anal and oral and hair pulling, and like so many things can bring us pleasure with those pleasure waves, and even over the edge into climax.
Right. Yeah. Someone I interviewed once described the climax as the physical sneeze. It's like the clenching and the just that little peak, but the orgasmic state can exist above that, below that. It's sort of all of that intense pleasure in between. And most people, even if you've only ever had external clitoral orgasms, you know that there are some that are great, and you know that there are some that you're like, it's okay. All of that's in the sort of orgasmic realm. And then there's the energetic orgasm, which I most often experience. And especially in my queer relationships, I love to top, and I
Mhm.
love a lot of a pleasure dom where I'm actually giving um, a woman or a vulva owner an orgasm, and I get energetic orgasm from that. Meaning when she's done and I've finished, giving all the kinds of pleasure I want to, and she's of course allowing. Oftentimes people will say, "Well, do you want me to touch you?" And I'm like, I got mine. And it's this being up in that orgasmic realm long enough, you're like, I don't need to be touched. I'm good. Right. But but you can't have access to that, or it's hard to gain access to that if you have fear or you
Mhm.
have trust. If you don't trust yourself to know when and where it's safe to do things, right?
Right.
Hard for true fear and sexual excitement or arousal and pleasure to exist in the same place,
Mhm.
because the fear response just drops cortisol, all of the things that are orgasm killers, right?
Mhm.
And pleasure wants the opposite. It wants the feel good chemicals mixing, and so
I just wanna, sort of, highlight something you said about the female orgasm in particular. Like, it is so powerful, and I would say, actually orgasm in general, regardless of the body and the shape that it came in. I had the pleasure of being in a room of sexual activity over the weekend, and I forgot how much you can just feel when you're in a room of orgasm, like how easy it is to tap into that and allow yourself to feel into that. And being in a room, particularly with other women who are in a state of orgasm, it's kind of easy to just jump on that ride.
but, like,
um,
think about that. I think that's a great opportunity to talk about. You and I know that. I know that if I were to walk into a room like that, because I to have been in rooms like that. Like, it's all about catching the energy and being able to you can get into that state before you've even been touched when you're around people who are in that state. But if you are someone who steps into that energy and your brain and your mind goes, "This is dangerous."
Mhm.
You can like, think about, I mean, I've certainly brought new people, like friends to sex clubs who've never been into it and who have, like, fear around sex because of whatever. It could have been any it could the trauma can even just come from shame. Shame
Mhm.
is trauma. Can we
Right.
all just talk about that for a second? Sexual shame creates trauma. Because you've been told doing this thing is terrible, and yet you still wanna undo it.
Mm. Mm.
That is trauma.
Mm.
And then you walk into a room where this free sex and this energy is happening, and well, if you've taken friends to, like, sex clubs or to have an experience, and it's just like they go white and it's like the stepping away, like, I'm like, "Fuck yeah," and they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa," like, totally
Right.
different reaction, and that's part of the work that we can all do.
Mhm.
You
You
can
know, and
even go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, and I have to, if I'm honest, and I am, um, I often will have that, like, because there's so much energy there at once, it can be a lot to step into that. And this is, the opportunity to bring in some of the practices of, like, getting grounded for a moment, being, connected to yourself, and, reminding yourself, like, "Oh, yes, this is a safe place for me to be." And, to and you don't have to, like, open up to everything at once, right? You can, like, "Okay, I think I'm just gonna stay over here in this area, which is the more PG area, and just feel what's
Mhm,
here." Um, or, I'm gonna go I'm and sort of pace yourself, right?
absolutely.
So, I know, I've had clients where, I've their assignment, their experiment for the week has been to go to a sexy event, whatever they felt was sexy, whether it was high tea or, a sex club, wherever it was that they found their turn on. And the invitation was to, just go and be in the energy, right? And so to go and be in the energy, and if they chose to play in the energy, the invitation was to take a, like, 15-minute break so that they could actually feel themselves and feel the difference of what it's like to be in that arousal energy and what it's like to be out of it. So,
Yes.
and this kind of talks a little bit about what you were talking about earlier with the trust piece of, like, can you feel yourself in the arousal? Can you feel yourself out of it? And can you trust yourself to make those next choices?
Right, absolutely, because if you've built that trust with yourself, even if you go into a place and you're like, "Wow, this is a lot," you're like, "It's a lot, but I can step out if I want to," or, "Hey, I'm just gonna go over here and watch," or I can decide ask someone, oftentimes there's, like, tastings where people will offer to give you a little spanking or whatever it is that they're doing. You trust yourself enough to stay where it's comfortable or to follow a desire as to the place where it's comfortable and step away when it's not. But it can take time to build that with yourself. And it's important that people realize too, this isn't always a conscious thing that's going on in your body. We're not dealing with a conscious thing here. You have to trust that you're teaching yourself and that it's sinking in deeper into your subconscious where a lot of these fear reactions and avoidance reactions exist. An easier way, again, because it's such a viral thing for people to understand this is, for example, your attachment styles. People understand that attachment styles and the reactions in relationships are not happening in a conscious way, right?
Mhm.
Your subconscious is running them. And we learn ways to identify what our attachment style is doing and start breaking that down so we're not we're not reacting in ways that are harmful to our relationships. This is the same thing I'm suggesting here, right?
Mhm.
You recognize that you're really into your partner, you're messing around, and at some point during sex, your body starts saying no. It goes numb. They go to, enter you. You feel nothing, or you feel pain, or there's the dissociation. Suddenly you're outside of yourself looking at yourself, or suddenly you're, daydreaming about something else and you're gone. There are these signs. And so now just like in an attachment style, when, oh, they say, I love you, and you want to run out the fucking door. And you're like, oh,
Mhm.
that's that's my attachment style. So now you've got the signs. So
Mhm.
now what is our process to deal with that and heal that underlying trauma, right?
Yeah, so I wanna get there in just a moment, but as you were talking, it occurred to me, particularly if you have a partner, how how do you talk to them about, like, "Hey, I need you to know there's this experience that I've had. This is what I've noticed it does for me, and this is how I would like to play with you," or how do you have, suggestions around talking to partners?
So I think something that's really important that I've learned through experience and of course education is it's important to share, especially if you now know, okay, this is how my past trauma is affecting me. I lived a long time going, oh, that happened back when I was 13, 14. I'm
Mm,
sure it's not, it's just old news.
mhm,
It's not gonna affect. I think, first of all, you need to know how it's affecting your body. So
mhm,
sit down with yourself and list out what are some things that have I noticed any of these things happening? My body shutting down, me getting through, like white knuckling through sex, or all of those things. Look for your signs and symptoms because it's going to be a much easier conversation if you know how you're being affected. Number two, when you talk to them about it, first of all, let's not do that in bed. That's not going to be the right place for either of you. Let's have that conversation. At some emotionally intimate time, I think people always say, like, sit down at a table and have the conversation. I feel like this is like an important conversation to have when you're feeling safe with each other. It's just like
mhm,
maybe you're cuddling on the couch, getting ready to watch a movie, or you're just having a night in and sharing a glass of wine and spending intimate time talking. Something that feels safe, cozy, held, and you feel open. You feel like you guys are in this open space where you're talking about things that are important. That's a really good time to say, hey, there's something important that I need to tell you about myself. And if you could listen with an open mind afterwards, I'd love to answer any questions you have.
mhm,
And then say it. And it can be hard to do that if you haven't done your own work to de-shame that conversation. Trust me, I've had that conversation so many times when I was younger where it was like I was saying it like there was something wrong with me. Right?
mm,
Like I'm so sorry, but I have to tell you that I was raped and like I'm apologizing for this thing that's not mine to apologize for, right? But
right,
instead, we're talking to our partners from a place of like, this is something that happened to me at this period of time. I want you to know that here are the things I've been kind of doing to deal with it. And this is how it can show up in bed sometimes. And here's what I need from you.
mm,
Now, in order to have that conversation, you kind of have to know
right, right.
what to
Well,
ask for, right?
right, and as you're saying this, I mean, it occurs to me that, people well, I'll go with, most men are interacting with women who have this kind of trauma. And so, I'm wondering if there's like what would have opened you what would open you up to have the conversation if your partner was to say to you, you know, I'm curious, like, because there's now that I'm actually saying that out loud, it's like, is there a good way to say, "Hey, I know that most women have, had this kind of violation. Is that something that's happened to you?" Like,
I mean, I think that's a fascinating. I haven't ever thought about the partner asking. That's not true. I have been in situations where I think, I've had partners just kind of say, "Hey, I noticed you do this."
Mhm.
Is there anything you want to talk to me about? So first of all, for men who may be listening to this, or people like if you're a woman in a relationship with a woman and you recognize you go to have penetrative sex with her, or at any point during intimacy, some clenching in the body
Mhm.
or distancing or avoiding certain acts, that's a great opening. Not in that moment,
Right.
afterwards, in a safe setting, in a non sexual setting, to say, hey, last night when I went to go down on you, or I noticed when I touched you this way, you seemed to kind of flinch or pull away. Is there
Mhm.
something you'd like to share? I think just digging down into what you notice. First of all, everyone should be paying attention and looking for partners because and both men and women will continue doing things they don't want to because they think they're expected of them. This happens a lot. And you will see it in their face, their affect, how they brace when they clench their eyes closed because they're just trying to get to the orgasm or trying to get through it. This happens oftentimes because there's so much shame around sex. We should be curious about our partners enough to say, hey, I noticed last night you had your eyes closed all the way through sex.
Mhm.
Can I ask, is that how you usually are? Is something going on? Is there something that, I can do to make you more comfortable, or is that just where you need to be? Like, be curious about how your partner is in bed.
Right. Hearing you say that reminds me of, I had a male-bodied partner for a while, and, uh, I kinda like oral sex, and he actually didn't. And it took him, like, months to tell me because men are supposed to like this thing, right? You know? Men are
He didn't
supposed
like
to.
going down? He didn't like going down, or he
No,
didn't like
he didn't like receiving oral. He didn't like receiving blowjobs, which, you know, I think I actually saw a meme that was like, something that men never say or that no man has ever said, that he didn't like, a blowjob or doesn't like penetrative sex or whatever. And I just, as we're having this conversation, this piece around noticing what's going on with your partner and then, inquiring about it. Like having, we don't have the Monday night quarterback conversation about sex. Um
right,
or if we do, it's like, "Was it good for you?" But, like, it's and unshaming or de-shaming and getting to have these conversations, particularly about, like, "Oh my god, when you did that thing, you know, was so good, and I
yeah.
totally prefer it to that other thing that you did."
Right, right. Yeah, and it is interesting. We have expectations of people based on gender, what they're gonna like and what they're not gonna like. And we all feel those expectations, and then we have sex according to them as opposed to according to what our bodies actually want. But I also don't think it's a bad thing for a guy to say, "Hey," I mean, especially right now in society, you have so many openings to this conversation. You can
Mhm.
say, "Hey, I was just reading about the Epstein files, about there's so many stories out there. Use one of those stories as an opening and then say, I've been reading about this and realizing how many women have experienced trauma. And I just want you to know, if she hasn't said anything to you, that if you have ever had anything happen, f- I'm here to support you. And I hope you feel like you could trust me enough to talk to me about it."
Oh
I
my
mean,
god, if somebody said that to me, like,
I'd be like, let's go to bed, baby.
yeah, like, not only would it open the conversation, but it would definitely, go towards, opening up my sexuality and, to have more sex there. I wanted to go back to.
You wanted to say opening my legs. I
It's
heard.
true! I was gonna
I
say,
heard you.
opening that conversation would totally open my legs. Um,
That's what you wanted to say.
it's true, but I was feeling all like, I'm
Oh,
just
wait a second. This is a great moment. You were feeling all because we were talking about it in context of sexual assault. This
right.
is a great example. And it comes up in all of us because even as I almost like looked at you and said, I know what you want to say, then I'm like, oh, we are talking about sexual assault, but this is where we need to like this is why I say all of us need to be having this conversation because it's
Mhm.
okay. I'm a rape survivor, and I can say if some guy says, "Tell me about your trauma," I'm gonna open my legs. I don't know, not that just any guy, but if a partner of mine were to say that, oh yeah, I'm gonna feel juicier than
Right.
normal. And I don't wanna hesitate to say those things because we're having the context of this conversation. So it's a great example that even with people like you and I who are out here, like, talking about it, even we choke up, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was gonna say something somewhere along the line about, um, the idea. Oh, that was what it was. One of the beauties of kink is that, some of these conversations are had up front because you need to know these things to be able to negotiate how we're gonna play together. And I think one of the things that, I appreciate about what's coming out in consent culture particularly, other than, of course, the idea of people actually being in consent and actually having the kind of sex and pleasure that they want, but, like, it makes some of these conversations a lot easier around, you know, what our expectations around sex is. What is the story that we make up when we are a sexual being, you know?
Mm.
Um, for a long time, I know for me, I came from the, story of, like, sex only happened in relationship, and so what that meant was I was in a lot of very short relationships.
Yep, yep.
Like, I really I wanted the experience and I wanted, the thing, but, like, that person and I weren't our best connection was in bed, and we
Right.
didn't need to be trying to make a life together. um and I really believe that we have all of these different opportunities and chances to be sexual with people, or all these opportunities to have more pleasure in our lives, because at the bottom, at least for me, that's the place where I'm going, for sexuality outside of my primary relationship, is it's like the pleasure, the life force, the zhuzh. Um, but, you and I have talked a bit about the idea that kink, BDSM can be a very healing experience.
Mhm.
And you sort of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about topping women. Um, and so first I'm gonna invite you to talk a little bit about what it means to be a top, for
Yeah.
those of, people who aren't listening who may not, or who are excuse me, for those who are listening who may or may not have that context of, what a top is and how that works in a pleasure scene.
Yeah, so it's interesting, especially in queer sex, topping can mean different things. But when I use it both in a queer sense. So when I'm in a queer sexual connection, I'm having sex with another woman, it tends to mean you can say the one on top, but the one who maybe is doing the penetrating, the one who is doing the leading. It can also be sort of a dom sub dynamic where I am leading, guiding, and telling the more submissive person what to do, how to do it, and what I want with consent. I'm not just doing this and they're like having to do this. This is like a dynamic that we've talked about in advance. So if I'm like, you're going to get down on your knees and whatever, then they already know that I'm not asking, I'm telling them to do this. Not asking. I'm telling them to do this. So I'm in the dominant role. In my queer connections, typically it's like it's two kinds of topping where I'm literally on top and doing the penetrative, the pleasure or pain giving role. I tend to be I lean more toward the pleasure giving dynamic. So I'm telling them how I want them. I'm telling them how I want to give it to them. I'm then giving their body all sorts of stimulation and evoking different types of pleasure, sometimes, most oftentimes, some kind of orgasm. We were talking before about the different types. You've got clitoral, G spot, A spot orgasm. And as a pleasure top, once you kind of know what you're doing and about your partner's pleasure and what works for them. You can take them into that orgasmic zone, as Deborah was mentioning earlier, which is a zone of pleasure, if you will. I know there are audio listeners and you cannot see my hand motions, but think about like a zone. And then within that zone, there's different orgasms that exist, right?
Hmm.
And I'm giving pleasure. So maybe it starts with a blended orgasm because I'm using my hands and then on her external clitoris and then a toy on both the G spot and A spot. And it starts with a clitoral orgasm. And then I'm doing a blended orgasm. And then I move into A orgasm or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But that's topping. Like I'm the one doing that. I'm telling her how I want her to lay, where I want her to move. I might do some binding. And then that gets into the Dom sub dynamic, the topping, where you're in control or in the dominant role.
Hmm. And
So I feel like I was all over with that because I was trying to layer the queer part of it with the kink part of it.
well, you did a great job because
Uh,
I'm definitely ready for the orgasm.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Because
what I love, and it can lead to things like fisting and all sorts of hot things.
absolutely. But I want to talk a little bit about, orgasm and pleasure and everyday life. And I know that you have an experiment that you've been doing, your 360,
Yeah.
365.
So in 2022, I did an experiment. And it was a challenge. It was a 365 days of orgasms challenge where I challenged myself on January 1st of 2022 to have one orgasm a day for a year. And I always joke around because I had just been at a sex club having hot sex with my ex-boyfriend. And I like made this declaration publicly while I was coming off a alcohol and sex fueled high. And I was like, I could
as
do this
one
every day.
as one does.
Right. But really, it ended up I was in a long distance relationship at that point, so I was doing most of the work myself, and it ended up in this incredible journey, through trauma and heartache and realization coming to the holy truth of the trauma that was there and the lack of pleasure that I was experiencing and how trauma was still living in my body and in my soul. And by the end of the year, well, first of all, I was having all kinds of pleasure and my vagina, because I was one of those women who would have a lot of penetrative sex, but I couldn't feel anything. I was like, why do people like this?
Mhm.
And I had been told by my mother when I was young, well, lots of women don't really feel anything inside. Only very special or few women get to have internal orgasms, which is a bunch of bullshit. Um, and through this process, I started to feel. I was like, "Oh my god, I can feel inside my vagina," and then it was like, "Oh my god, I can. There's my G spot and there's my A spot." So it was crazy to feel a body that for 40 years, whatever, had been unable to feel something start to feel it. So what I've done with that journey, and I did that, I did have an orgasm every day, at least one, for a year. I did it through COVID, a couple of cases of COVID. I did it through a breakup. I did it through just all sorts of stuff. And I've taken what I've learned from that and the practices I developed over the years, and I turned it into 365 days of orgasms. Pleasure is the resolution journey that I'm doing on my website, talksexwithannette.com. And on my social media, I post it on my Instagram and my YouTube channel. Once a week, I put up a practice.
Mhm.
So, and it's been a journey, and we started. And the thing is, you can start this anytime. I
Mhm.
started it on week 1 of January, and it started with just connecting with pleasure, figuring out what brings you pleasure, talking about the 5 senses, what tastes, exploring tastes and scents. And then we started moving into the body, and then we moved into eventually genital touch. We've worked through G spot exploration and A spot exploration through uh, yeah, we've moved through blended orgasms and multi orgasms. And basically, over the course of this year, once a week, I post a lesson
Mhm.
with a daily practice for the week. I also give you options of tools to use if you need them because it's not easy to do all this with your hand. It's
Right,
a lot of
right.
work. So you can always use just your hand, or if you have a partner who wants to join you on this journey and be your tool, I think it's great because they're gonna learn how to give a lot of pleasure as well.
Mhm,
But it's really just a full journey. You don't have to have an orgasm every day. There's no pressure for that at all. This is discovery,
mhm,
and you can do it at whatever pace you wanna do it at. Um, I feel like this is such an important gift to give people because I think it's a route to healing, regardless of if you even if you've never in your mind, you're like, "I've never had any sexual trauma."
mhm,
It's still going to improve your sex life, and it's still going to be a tool you can use with your partner to explore pleasure together. If you have had any kind of trauma, and that can be from sexual assault to, again, childbirth can be incredibly traumatizing to a woman's body, to, even if you have just painful periods that have created trauma in that area, or you have a condition, vaginismus, something, this is a way to rediscover pleasure in your body, intimate pleasure in your body. Even if you're someone who doesn't want to ever have sex with anyone else again, this
mhm,
is a great way to still get all of the benefits of sex. And I'm sure on this podcast, you've talked about how important it is to have orgasms and pleasure because of the chemicals that it drops. Not only that, it's important to do some internal stimulation as you age to keep those tissues healthy because they'll start to atrophy otherwise, which is terrible and painful for women.
mhm,
Having this kind of practice is it's like working out, right? It's this is or eating healthy food or taking your vitamin. It's vital to your health, everything from physical to mental to emotional to spiritual, if you will. Um, so yeah, it's just something I offer on my social media. My Instagram handle is at Annette Benedetti, and my website and my YouTube channel.
and of course, all of these, will be linked in the show notes, and I'm like, "Oh, I wanna do that." And just out of curiosity, do you bring, like, groups through this or what how do people work with you?
So I right now I offer one-on-one coaching, and that's also on my website. Am definitely developing a program for it, but I wanted to first do like the year-long journey with people because I think that once people kind of go and they look at it and they try it for themselves, that's where they're going to find the value in it and decide
Mhm,
if the journey they want to take deeper. Also, if you don't ever want to do it with a coach or anyone else, it's just something that it's going to help you in your life one way or the other. It's gonna give you more pleasure. At the very least, when you feel like I need to do something,
mhm.
it's gonna give you a way just to do some have some pleasure in your life. You don't need
Beautiful.
anyone else. This is your own little self-care routine, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I do wanna just say that, like, it does we can do things in ourselves in isolation, but I think one of the places that, and we've talked about this a little bit round and round, but, like, really bringing, sex and pleasure into a conversation and out of the shame box, it's so helpful. And it's really fascinating when you talk to other people about or get to see what other people's bodies can do. Like, I have to tell you, one of the most incredible things, that I've learned being out seeing in and getting to see people, like groups of people in sexual experiences, it's like, wow, I had no idea bodies could do that. And just really like the range of different kinds of bodies. Um,
Mm,
there's and what do I wanna say? There's a place where it's like when bodies don't look the way that you expect them to do, that that seeing somebody that you so for instance, this weekend, I there was somebody that, didn't have, full legs, He had a condition where his legs didn't fully develop. The rest of him was very well developed, and just like but the noticing him in pleasure and him having, a sexual experience completely shifted how I hadn't really thought about disabilities in that way. And so, getting to see people of all shapes and sizes, of all, gender expressions in pleasure and in orgasm is such an extraordinary experience. So, uh, this conversation has been amazing, and we've
That
gone in all sorts of different directions, but I do want to ask if there's one thing that you really want people to walk away from, um, in addition to checking out, the pleasure guide, what would you like people to get out of our time together?
I think that one of the most important things from this conversation is that you shouldn't put a box around what someone's sexuality is going to look like based on the experiences they've had, especially trauma. Allow people to still want to engage in pleasure even when difficult, hard, and terrible things happen to them. Be curious. Be curious about your partner. Be curious about yourself. Why is my body doing this?
Mm.
Be curious about it and find out. Don't wait 10, 20, 30 years to finally be like, maybe I am still being affected by something that happened that was terrible when I was younger. Be curious about why, when you touch yourself in different places, it feels bad or painful or nothing. And then do something about it, right? Sex has a lot of shame tied to it. And unfortunately, for each one of us, it means that it takes all of us undoing that and doing some work. And that work can be really fun and full of orgasms. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Sometimes the work is good and fun and you know, difficult in some ways. My journey with an orgasm every day had difficult moments that were just really beautiful at the end. So, pleasure is your birthright.
Mm.
Ultimately, that is what really needs to come from this conversation. It's important that you know that, and it's yours to have if you want it. Listen to people like Deborah, myself. I have a podcast, Talk Sex with Annette, and continue to learn and grow and try new things.
Beautiful, thank you. So, if you could slowly reiterate your podcast and your website and your socials so that people can hear it and find it. And of course, again, it will be in the show notes. But yeah, so where can we find you?
Yes, get your pens out because I want to make sure you write it down. My podcast is Talk Sex with Annette. So
Hmm.
pretty easy to remember. You can find it on YouTube at Talk Sex with Annette. It's also on every podcast outlet, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, you name it, it's out there. You can find my 365 days of orgasms journey on my website. My website is talksexwithannette.com, but there's also a playlist of those videos on my YouTube channel, which we just talked about. There's also those videos are going up on my Instagram, which is Annette Benedetti. That's my Instagram with my last name. That's Annette, last name Benedetti. I also have a very active Facebook page, which is Talk Sex with Annette, and TikTok, Talk Sex with Annette. So most everywhere you just find me with Talk Sex with Annette.
I'm so thrilled to be talking sex with Annette. So
I know. I
good.
love I love it when I get to sit with another woman who has dedicated their life to this kind of conversation because it's so important. And I want to thank you again for being willing to have this conversation around sex after sexual assault, because it's something that a lot of people shy away from and shy away from making it a fun, sexy conversation. And I feel like this conversation had all of those elements.
Well, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to have you here and, such generosity in terms of sharing your own journey and your 365 days of pleasure sounds amazing. And so I just really want to thank you for being a guest here. And for those of you who are listening, please share this conversation with your friends, with your family, anyone who needs to hear about pleasure and what's possible here. And yeah, so, and if you'd like more support in creating connection, intimacy, and pleasure in your life, please book a sexy reset. It is in the show notes. And just remember, great sex isn't magic. It's a practice and it's showing up. So keep showing up for yours and bye for now.